I found out my nephew was actually my son, and my brother hid the truth for 10 years. You ever have that one family member who's just always gotta remind you that you don't measure up? Yeah, that's my sister-in-law Rachel. Ever since she married my older brother Brian, she's treated me like I'm some sort of charity case. Doesn't matter that I work full-time. Doesn't matter that I pay my bills on time and don't ask for help. In her eyes I'm poor, and that makes me less than. But the thing is, she messed around and forgot one simple rule. Life has a funny way of flipping the script. Let me back up. I'm 33. Live in a small 2-bedroom house I inherited from our grandma. It's not much, but it's mine. I fix things myself, do side gigs on weekends, and I'm one of those people who actually clips coupons and keeps a budget spreadsheet. Yeah, I know, it's not glamorous. But I sleep fine at night. Brian, my big brother, is the opposite. He married rich. Rachel's family owns a bunch of car dealerships down in Texas. Their wedding probably cost more than I've made in the last 5 years. They live in this giant house with one of those kitchens that looks like it belongs on the Food Network. And every time we see each other, it's the same routine. Rachel fake smiles, asks if I've found a better job yet, and makes comments about how some people just weren't born with ambition. Like, girl, just say you think I'm beneath you and move on. The last straw was Thanksgiving last year. We were all sitting around the dining table. Rachel had gone all out: turkey, ham, mac and cheese that probably cost $40 just in cheese, and even little named cards at each seat like it was some royal banquet. I had brought a homemade pecan pie. Nothing fancy, just something my grandma used to make. As we're eating, Rachel starts asking everyone about holiday plans. So what are you doing for Christmas, Evan? She asks, loading it with that tone, like she already knows I'll be spending it alone with a microwave dinner. I said, probably staying home. Money's tight, and I don't really do the big celebration thing. And that's when she said it. Oh, come on. You're not that poor. I mean, if you can afford to raise a dog, you can afford to visit family. Everyone laughed awkwardly. Except me. And except Rachel's 12-year-old son, Mason, who was staring down at his plate like he wanted to disappear. Now here's the kicker. I used to be close with Mason. When he was little, Brian and Rachel were always traveling or working, so he'd spend weekends with me. We'd go fishing, build stuff in the garage, make pancakes with chocolate chips shaped like dinosaurs. He used to call me Uncle E, and say I was his favorite grown-up. But ever since Rachel started pushing this whole "we're better than him" routine, those visits stopped. She said my place was too rundown, and that it wasn't a good environment for a child. Like having a creaky screen door and an old TV was somehow toxic. Anyway, after the Thanksgiving dinner, I pulled Brian aside. I didn't yell. Just told him his wife's comment was out of line and that I missed spending time with Mason. He looked tired, worn down in a way I hadn't seen before. He nodded and said, I'll try to talk to her. Spoiler, nothing changed. Until everything did. It started with a phone call, about 2 months later. It was Mason. He whispered, Uncle E? Can I stay with you for a while? I thought it was a joke. Then I heard crying in the background. And then, Rachel yelling. That was the first night he showed up on my doorstep with a backpack and bruises. And that's when I realized. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about saving a kid. I barely recognized Mason when I opened the door. He was standing there in the middle of a freezing January night, wearing a hoodie that looked 2 sizes too small and sneakers that were soaked through. His left cheek was red, not from the cold but from something else. And his eyes, man, that look in his eyes stuck with me. I stepped aside without saying a word, and he came in like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. I made him some hot cocoa, handed him a blanket, and we sat on the old couch in silence for a bit. Eventually, he looked at me and said, Please don't make me go back. I didn't. The next morning, I called Brian. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Then I called again. And again. By noon, Rachel texted me. We know where Mason is. He'll be picked up tonight. He's grounded and ran off. Do not interfere with our parenting. My blood boiled. Not just because of the tone, but because that meant she knew he'd left. And she didn't ask if he was safe. She didn't ask if he was hurt. Just that he was grounded. I didn't respond. Instead, I did what I should have done a long time ago. I took Mason to urgent care. The doctor took one look and called in a social worker. Mason had bruises along his ribs and a sprained wrist. He didn't say much, but the doctor noted signs of sustained physical stress. and flagged it as suspected child abuse. Things moved fast after that. Child Protective Services showed up the next day. They interviewed me, interviewed Mason, and took statements. The investigator asked if I could take temporary custody if needed. I didn't even hesitate. Signed whatever papers they had ready. Brian finally called that night. He sounded panicked. Not angry. Scared. He begged me not to blow this up. Said Rachel had been having a hard time. And that it's not what it looks like. But here's the thing. It was exactly what it looked like. Over the next few weeks, everything started unraveling. Rachel tried to paint Mason as a difficult child in her CPS interviews. Said he was prone to lying and out of control. But the school told a different story. Teachers reported signs of neglect, behavior changes, and even one incident where Mason had come to school with a black eye and said he'd fallen down the stairs. Sound familiar? The worst part? Brian backed her up. Said Mason was just acting out. That's when I knew he wasn't just scared of losing his kid, he was scared of the truth coming out. And sure enough, the truth had claws. A few weeks later, Rachel's sister, her own sister, reached out to me. She said she'd seen the story about the investigation online. And she told me something that made my stomach turn. Apparently, Rachel had a history. Back in college, she'd been reported twice for aggressive behavior toward roommates. There was even a sealed court record about an incident involving her ex-boyfriend, but he dropped the charges. That wasn't all. Her sister told me she was on medication for what sounded like untreated mood swings, but often skipped doses. When she drank, she got mean. Real mean. Suddenly, everything started to click. The cutting comments. The control. The way Brian seemed like a shell of himself every time I saw him. They weren't just rich. They were trapped. One night, about a month into Mason staying with me, I found something in his backpack. A flash drive. I asked him what it was, and he looked down and said, "It's from Mom's computer. I took it before I left." I almost didn't check it. But curiosity won. What I found changed everything. Emails. Dozens of them. Between Rachel and her accountant. She'd been siphoning money out of Brian's business accounts. Hiding it in offshore accounts under a shell company, one that didn't exist on paper. $180,000. Gone. All while telling everyone Brian was irresponsible with money. The woman who called me poor was laundering her husband's income. I printed every email, backed them up in the cloud, and took screenshots. Because at that point, it wasn't just about protecting Mason anymore. It was about exposing a monster. End of Part 2, approximate 6,000 characters. Let me know if you're ready for Part 3, where things heat up with court drama, a custody battle, and a shocking betrayal that turns the entire family upside down. By the time the court hearing rolled around, I had everything documented. I wasn't playing around anymore. CPS had already filed for temporary custody to remain with me. Rachel and Brian were contesting it, of course. Their lawyer came in cocky, wearing some $1,000 suit like this was gonna be an easy win. But he didn't know what I had in my back pocket. Court started off tense. Rachel sat across from me in her beige power outfit like she was on Real Housewives of Texas, clutching her pearls and pretending to cry. Brian sat next to her, eyes glued to the floor. He looked like a man who'd lost a war he didn't even realize he was in. The judge asked Rachel to speak first. She went off about how I had influenced Mason. Said I made her son believe he was being abused just to steal him from her. Her exact words were, "This is a financially motivated grab. Evan wants to punish us for having more." That was it. That was the moment the judge raised an eyebrow. Because up until then, it looked like a standard custody dispute. But now it was personal. My turn came. I handed over everything, the medical reports, school records, letters from Mason's teachers, even a note from the therapist Mason had been seeing since moving in with me. Then, like a quiet little bomb, I slid the flash drive across the table. "Your Honor," I said, "these are emails between Mrs. Wallace and her accountant. I believe they show evidence of financial misconduct that could suggest a motive for creating instability in the household." The judge paused. Rachel's face drained of color. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved it off. He spent about 10 minutes reading through the first few emails on his laptop, and I could literally feel the oxygen leave Rachel's side of the room. And then Mason asked if he could speak. Now, if you've ever seen a 12-year-old stand up in a courtroom with their whole life on the line, you'll know it's one of the bravest damn things a kid can do. He walked up, stood in front of the judge, and said, "My mom says I lie. But I only started lying when I realized telling the truth didn't matter. Uncle Evan listens to me. He doesn't hit me when I spill juice or forget to put my shoes away. He talks to me like I'm a person, not a problem." The whole courtroom went silent. Even Brian was crying. Mason looked at him and said, "I love you, Dad. But you let her hurt me. I needed you to stop her." That was the last nail in the coffin. The judge ruled on the spot, full temporary custody awarded to me, pending a formal review. Rachel was barred from contacting Mason. CPS would begin a full financial and psychological investigation into her. And Brian, well, he asked the court for supervised visits, but he wasn't allowed to take Mason home. Not yet. I thought that would be the end of it. But that was just the calm before the next storm. A few weeks later, I got a call from Rachel's accountant. The same one from the emails. Turns out, the financial stuff was way deeper than I knew. Rachel wasn't just hiding money. She was funneling funds through fake invoices from a nonprofit that didn't exist. Tax fraud. Money laundering. Wire fraud. The accountant flipped. Cooperated fully. Gave the IRS and the DA everything. And just like that, Rachel got indicted. You'd think Brian would have finally seen the light, right? Wrong. He showed up at my door, eyes red and desperate, asking for a second chance. Said he wanted to get his family back. I told him I'd consider it, if he got therapy, if he testified against Rachel, if he admitted in court what really happened. He agreed. I thought maybe, just maybe, we were on the road to fixing things. But then 2 days before the next court date, he disappeared. No call. No text. I went to his house. Empty. I called his work. He quit. Rachel had made bail, and guess who helped her? Yep. Brian. They were gone. CPS freaked. Mason cried for a full hour the night we found out. We filed a report, and for a while, it looked like they just vanished. I didn't sleep much that week. Every time a car drove past the house, I peeked through the blinds like I was in a thriller movie. But then something weird happened. A package showed up at my door. No return address. Inside was a burner phone, a prepaid card with $500, and a note written in Brian's handwriting. "I'm sorry. Take care of him. Don't look for us." Mason stared at it for a long time. Then he looked up at me and said, "She took him too." And I realized. My brother wasn't a monster. He was a prisoner. After Brian and Rachel vanished, life settled into a strange new normal. Mason and I tried to keep things steady. I got him into a new school, made sure he was seeing a therapist regularly, and even let him redecorate the spare bedroom however he wanted. Spoiler, it now glows in the dark. But there was always this quiet weight hanging in the air. Questions we didn't say out loud. Where was Brian? Would they come back? Was Mason really safe now? Then one day, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was a woman named Dana. Said she was a private investigator hired by Rachel's sister. "She's worried," Dana said. "Thinks Rachel's unstable and dangerous. Wants to make sure Mason's safe and that your brother hasn't done something stupid." I didn't know whether to trust her. But something in her voice told me she was legit. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't looking for drama. She just wanted to help. So I told her everything. And she told me something I didn't expect. "I've been following Rachel's digital trail," Dana said. "They used a debit card under Brian's name in Santa Fe last week." My heart jumped. "But here's the weird part," she added. "There's a second card, under the name Hannah Bellamy. Rachel's maiden name. She's using it to send wire transfers to someone in Florida." I asked if she knew who the money was going to. She didn't. Yet. A few days later, Dana called back. "I found something," she said. "You're not going to like it." Apparently, the money was going to a woman named Teresa Cole. She was 48. Lived in a trailer park just outside of Tampa. And 20 years ago, she gave birth to a baby boy. The name on the birth certificate? Mason Cole. I froze. "That can't be right," I said. "Rachel gave birth to Mason. I mean, I was there." Dana was quiet for a moment. "I'm not saying Rachel didn't raise him," she said. "I'm saying she didn't have him." The next week was a whirlwind. I didn't know what to believe. I didn't tell Mason, how could I? I needed proof first. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I ordered a DNA test. Sent it off without telling Mason. Used some old toothbrushes. Probably a little shady, but at that point, I needed the truth more than I needed permission. 2 weeks later, the results came in. I was a match. Brian wasn't. Rachel wasn't. And the birth mother? Teresa Cole. I didn't know how to process it. The only explanation that made sense was adoption, or something close to it. I dug into medical records, hospital logs, anything I could get my hands on. And then I found it. A sealed record of a private custody transfer filed in Dallas County when Mason was 2 months old. The biological parents? Teresa Cole and an unnamed father. The adopting guardians? Rachel and Brian Wallace. Here's the kicker: Texas law at the time didn't require full background checks for private adoptions. And Rachel paid Teresa $20,000 under the table. Which meant Mason wasn't just my nephew. He was my son. I confronted Dana about it. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. She sighed. "I was afraid it would complicate the custody case. But Evan, I think Brian knew. I think that's why he left. Not just to protect Rachel, but because he couldn't face what he did." I sat with that for a long time. How do you even tell a kid something like that? "Hey, buddy, remember how I've always been your goofy uncle? Surprise, I'm actually your dad." I didn't know how to break it. But life doesn't wait. 3 days later, I was driving Mason to school. We were stopped at a red light when he looked over at me and said, "Am I ever gonna see my dad again?" And before I could even think, I replied, "You're looking at him." He blinked. "You mean, like you're taking care of me?" I shook my head slowly. "I mean, I'm your real dad, Mason. I didn't know for sure until recently. But it's true. I never walked away, I just didn't know." He didn't say anything for a full minute. Then he turned toward the window and said, "I always thought you were." That night, I got another package in the mail. No return address. Inside? A photo of Mason as a baby in Rachel's arms. And scribbled on the back, in Brian's handwriting, "I'm sorry. You deserve the truth. I couldn't live with it. But maybe you can." After the DNA results and Brian's note, everything felt heavier. Mason didn't ask a lot of questions at first, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He'd stare at old photos a little longer. Ask strange questions at dinner. Like, "Did you ever think about having kids of your own?" Or, "Why did Uncle Brian always get weird when we talked about my baby pictures?" I tried to keep things normal. I mean, what does normal even mean after a bombshell like that? But I knew we couldn't just sit on the truth. So I filed a motion with the family court to have full legal custody, not just temporary. And this time, I came armed with every piece of truth I had. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. CPS reps, lawyers, even a couple of reporters showed up because of the pending charges against Rachel. Word had gotten out. And to my complete shock, Brian was there. He looked like a ghost. Thin. Pale. Eyes sunken. He sat on the defendant's side, next to a lawyer who looked like she was running damage control on a wildfire. Rachel wasn't with him. She was in custody. Turns out, skipping bail to run across state lines doesn't look great when you're already under indictment for wire fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. The judge asked Brian to speak. What he said wrecked me. "I knew Mason wasn't mine from the start. Rachel told me it didn't matter. Said he needed a home, and we could give him one. But she also said we couldn't tell anyone, not even Evan. She made it sound like a favor. A sacrifice." He looked at me across the room. "But I saw how Mason looked at you. Even when he was little. It was different. Like he just knew." He paused, voice shaking. "I was scared. Of losing everything. Of the truth. But I see now, holding on to a lie cost me my son anyway." The courtroom was silent. The judge nodded solemnly. Then he turned to me. I explained everything. The adoption records. The emails. The DNA test. I showed them Brian's handwritten note and the picture of baby Mason. I even brought in Dana, the private investigator, to verify the timeline. The judge asked Mason if he wanted to speak. He did. "I used to think I was unwanted. Like I was passed around. But now I know the people who loved me weren't the ones yelling the loudest. They were the ones who stayed." He looked at me and smiled. "Uncle Evan never gave up. Even when he didn't know the truth." When the judge ruled, it wasn't just a win. It was a liberation. Full legal custody granted. Parental rights transferred. Name change authorized. Mason Cole Wallace Mason Evan Bell. Yeah. He took my last name. That night, we celebrated with burgers and milkshakes. Mason asked if he could call me Dad now. I told him he could call me whatever he wanted, so long as he knew I'd always show up. He grinned and said, "Cool. Thanks, Dad." And I swear to God, that hit harder than any court ruling ever could. But just when I thought it was over, we got another letter. From Rachel. It came through the DA's office, postmarked from county jail. Just a single piece of paper, no return address. The letter was unhinged. Scrawled in all caps, full of blame and venom. "You stole my family. I gave that boy a life you never could. I won't forget this." And at the bottom, "This isn't over." I took it to the DA. They weren't surprised. Turns out Rachel had been making noise in jail, accusing the system, trying to cut deals, even threatening lawsuits. But nobody was buying it. Her trial was coming up, and the charges were stacking. Still, that line, "This isn't over," stuck with me. And then came the real shocker. Dana called again. "I just got a ping on one of Rachel's old cloud accounts," she said. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means she had a backup plan. A digital dead man's switch." Turns out, Rachel had recorded hours of videos, ranting about Brian, about Mason, about me. But buried in one folder was something else. Blackmail. Emails. Screenshots. Bank records. Dirt she had collected on dozens of people over the years. Judges. Real estate partners. Even the private school board Mason had once been waitlisted for. She had been planning something big. A reset. A reinvention. Maybe even a new identity. Dana sent the whole file to the FBI. So now Rachel wasn't just looking at jail time. She was staring down federal prison. It had been almost 4 months since the court ruling. Mason and I were building something solid, a real life. He joined the school's soccer team. I coached. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our Friday movie nights. For the first time in forever, it felt like we were just a regular father and son. But that peace? It didn't last. Because Rachel wasn't done. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of glass shattering. I grabbed the bat I kept next to the bed and bolted down the hall toward Mason's room. He was already awake, sitting up in bed, eyes wide. "Stay here," I whispered. He nodded. I crept toward the kitchen, heart pounding like a war drum. The sliding door was open. Broken. Curtains flapping in the wind. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Inside the house. I flipped on the hallway light and saw her. Rachel. She looked like a ghost. Hair matted. Clothes ripped. Eyes wild. One hand bleeding from where she'd punched through the glass to get in. "You don't get to keep him," she hissed. I stood between her and the hallway. "You need to leave. Right now. I'm calling the cops." She held up a piece of paper, some old court filing she must have printed before the custody decision. "I'm his mother. I raised him. You think a piece of paper changes that?" I kept calm. Kept her talking. Tried to slowly edge toward the phone. But she lunged. She rushed me like an animal, grabbing at my shirt, swinging wildly. I managed to knock her back, just enough to hit the panic button on the wall. The security alarm screamed to life. Red lights flashed. She ran. Bolted through the same broken door and disappeared into the night. The cops arrived 5 minutes later. We gave our statements. Mason was shaken, but safe. Rachel was arrested less than an hour later, hiding in a drainage ditch 3 blocks away. Turns out, she'd escaped transport custody during a courthouse transfer the day before. How? Still a mystery. Why? Not so much. The DA moved fast. This time, she wasn't getting bail. She faced charges of escape from custody, breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping, assault. Federal prosecutors tacked on conspiracy and digital extortion charges once they finished going through the files Dana had uncovered. Rachel was done. I testified again a month later. So did Mason. He was brave. Told the judge, "I want to stop being afraid. I just want to live like a normal kid." That did it. Rachel was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. No chance of parole for at least 15. Brian sent a letter from rehab. He said he was clean. Working construction out in Arizona. Asked if Mason would want to write back someday. Mason said maybe. Not now. But maybe. And that was enough. Life moved forward. Mason started calling me Dad, like it was nothing, like it had always been that way. He even introduced me to his friends as his real father. We took a road trip that summer. No destination, just open roads, gas station snacks, and good music. Somewhere around Colorado, Mason looked out the window and said, "Do you think she's ever gonna come back?" I said, "She won't be able to. And even if she could, she won't get past me again." He nodded. And smiled. "Yeah. I know. I've got you now." Epilogue. I never thought I'd be a father. Never thought I'd have to fight for a child I didn't even know was mine. But I did. And I'd do it again. Because family isn't about DNA or court papers or last names. It's about showing up. It's about standing between the people you love and the storms that try to swallow them. Mason is mine. Not because I said so. But because when the world tried to take him down, I stood up. And I didn't move.